Hello and welcome. What a lovely showing of our community. It's great to see all of you here. As Zach has just said, we're here for a discussion about the future of film, and I'll be setting the conversation into motion in just a moment, but let's do some introductions to begin. I'm Matthew Tinkcom. I'm a faculty member here in CCT, as well as affiliated with the Department of English and the School of Foreign Service, and currently I'm serving as the director of the American Studies program. And our panelists this evening, and I'll introduce them and then get our questions going. Our first person joining us is Caetlin Benson-Alott, who is a faculty member in the Department of English. And I have one small correction to the publicity that went around for the session this evening, which is that that listed her title as the assistant professor. We have splendid, marvelous news, which is that Caetlin secured tenure and promotion here just this past summer at Georgetown. So we're thrilled for that.
Thank you.
Caetlin writes on a variety of different film and cultural issues. Her first book, which I think is groundbreaking and will have huge effects in the field, is on different kind of media platforms for the moving image, including VHS, videotape, DVD, and streaming. She's also working on a project on the history of the remote control. And was just telling me about a project she's working on, which is on a film from the 1970s called Looking for Mr. Goodbar. Caitlin's always got really interesting things going on in her head. I read an article for her last year, which was about car movies in the 1970s and the relationship of the sort of this particular genre, which involves cars and drivers, and reading that against the political backdrop of the 1970s and the important kinds of material and cultural transformations in that period. So we're delighted to have Caetlin here. Then is Ralph Quattrucci, who is the director and senior editor at Ventana Productions. And Ralph has deep production experience. He's been making movies for 30 years, editing and now directing and producing cinema. Which means that he would have seen all those media platforms.
That would actually be a good research because I've used it all. So
yeah,
VHS.
exactly. So we welcome Ralph.
Right. Thank you.
And then lastly is Bentley Brown, who is an MA candidate here in the graduate program, the CCT program, and also a filmmaker. I'd be curious to know what the different sort of media platforms you've worked in, you being a mere 27 years old, I think. Okay. Yeah, that makes me old, but anyway. So those are our panelists. And we have three kind of just organizing questions to set things into motion. But our conversation can go in any direction that is of interest, both to the people up here, but also to the rest of us in the room. So the topic is the future of film. And that has two gigantic things inside of it: the future and film. It's a tantalizing and yet also always dangerous thing to want to have speculative and kind of predictive capacity about what will come. And usually what I think about when I think about questions like that is, I like to think in historical terms. So what is it that we know already from the past and from our present moment that seems to usher us towards what it is that could happen? The caveat that always has to come with talking about the future, if anything, and especially something as highly malleable as the motion picture in its now 125-year history, is the caveat is always that most predictions are always a little bit right and a lot wrong, but that's okay. If you get a little bit right, you're doing pretty good. So with that in mind, let me sort of talk about the organizing questions. And I would mention, by the way, I'm really glad that Zach and David put this together, and Bentley as well this evening. These are their questions, and I was thrilled to see them. I didn't have any sort of elaboration when they proposed these. So what they would like for us to be thinking out loud about are as follows, and I'll read them all three through, and then maybe we can start to work on them one by one. The first is the question: how are developing technologies, such as mobile devices and the internet, changing the creation and consumption of film? Our second question is, how are changes in gender and minority representation, both in front of and behind the camera, changing the medium of film? And the third question is, how will the embodied experience of the cinema survive the era of fragmented media audiences and dispersed distribution channels? So why don't we start with the first question. How are developing technologies, such as mobile devices and the internet, changing the creation and consumption of film? Thoughts?
Well, when we say film, you guys are just talking film. We're talking about filmmaking, because really film is gone. The physical film is gone. So we're dealing with digital cameras, and we're dealing with new media, we're dealing with iPhones. So filmmaking is what we're kind of talking about, and how people what devices are they using to get their films out there. And you can speak to that probably, and all of us can say, you know, it's all changed, right?
Likewise, the tools that you use to make films today sort of come hand in hand with the venues where these films or videos are accessed, which for a lot of us in our daily life includes websites or apps like YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, Vine, some of which are pretty ephemeral. I mean, they've come on the scene for about a year and drop off in use after that time.
So the first thing I want to say would be to ask you guys a question. When we say film, do we mean any moving images, or do we mean the genre of film, the 90-minute to 2-hour length feature motion picture, right? Because when I read the title of this panel, I assumed we were talking about the feature motion picture. So to me, what we see on YouTube has very little relationship to film. I think you can make the case that there is some correlative or some historical connection to 8mm in amateur filmmaking, but a lot of the subject matter, if you look into kind of history of home movies, is really different, right? The whole concept of, say, like the ALS challenge and viral filmmaking, you wouldn't have had the circulation with an 8mm film to create amateur memes like that. So I think we should ask what we mean when we say film. And the other thing I want to ask then is, what is our attention span, right? I think that's one of the huge questions that we have to ask when we think about how new media has changed film, is duration and what that means for the kind of stories we can tell.
Absolutely. Well, I think that, I mean, we're looking at designing a course right now that will take a look at film and sort of film's explorative efforts to predict the future or to engage with various technologies that are at hand right now. At the same time that course itself will likely concentrate on movies, because movies have their own sort of ability to impact and captivate us, unlike any 6-second Vine video or 2-minute YouTube video. A lot of the strategies, or a lot of the sort of the skeletal narrative composition of those movies has been adapted for a lot of these shorter forms of art as well. Some of these 6-second Vine videos have a 3-act structure that in some ways traces its roots to the grander filmmaking efforts. Another interesting phenomenon which sort of merges both the sort of mobile, everyone can do it filmmaking attitude and the already existing cinema industry is there's a new film festival, I think it's in Melbourne, Australia, that this year is only accepting applications or submissions of film shot in a vertical oriented format, which likely is, you know, iPad, tablet, iPhone, smartphone. So.
Well, to tag on what you were saying, the flip side of what you were saying, which is YouTube, is even Hollywood are doing Kickstarter programs on YouTube to fund their movies, to fund legitimate 2-hour sit-in-the-theater movies, or being funded socially. Zach Braff just did one. I think the Roger Ebert movie, the documentary, that was all funded through Kickstarter. They went out to people who watch YouTube and asked for money, and they get money to make their movie. So, yes, we are talking about films in the classical sense, but also YouTube and all this has also opened up filmmaking to more people who never would have been filmmakers if they couldn't have a Super 8 camera. I think the availability of this stuff is democratizing, is making it easier for people to get their stories out there. And
Can I play devil's advocate?
Absolutely.
I mean, the names you mentioned there, right? Roger Ebert, Zach Braff, these were not outsiders.
Right,
The films that we see raising money through Kickstarter and then getting released as films, and by that I mean, and that should be in scare quotes, so getting released cinematically, are already being made by insiders, right? Like, bless his heart, Rob Thomas may feel very ostracized within the Los Angeles television community, but Veronica Mars is not exactly, you know, an unknown quantity.
Right, but they're using they're using the social media. I understand that. Why would a inside Hollywood guy have to do a Kickstarter program? There's no reason. But I think they're trying to get the message out. I mean, it's just I think because we're all looking at our computers and we're all, you know, sitting there taking it in.
Yeah, I think we're opening up several topics here.
Sure.
But one thing is that look at the people that are on Vine. Look at those who have taken the YouTube miniseries as a very serious platform to engage with an audience on a regular basis and to sort of perfect their craft of representing a narrative through film or video, whatever we call it. A lot of these people still have aspirations to get to the bigger scene, to the
Right.
movies too. So they're sort of tied maybe through that chronological sense as well. Although I do agree that, I mean, sort of today, there's still nothing like the movie. I went today to the AMC Courthouse Theater to sit on this little leather couch kind of sofa thing and watch a movie. So.
Which I wanted to put back into the mix, which is that one of the things that fascinates me is that in the kind of saturated mediascape of so many different forms of moving image culture that we live in, for some reason the 90-minute to 2-hour allotment, right, of the feature, whether it's in the fictional format or documentary or animation, still is this really meaningful, like, cultural bundle, right? And so the reason I'm fascinated with that is that as so many of the technologies that would seem to democratize the making of film, the question of attention spans, the possibility of making sort of a 6-second, you know, sort of discernible narrative, I mean, not a particularly sophisticated one, but you can make one, still sits alongside, there's the kind of idea that something can happen in the feature that doesn't happen anywhere else. And I don't think it is either or. I think it's a both and. For me, it's a kind of, these things are relating to each other in some manner. Then so I'll offer an anecdote about sort of relationship, because I'd heard you say a moment ago, Caetlin, sort of, well, film is this say feature object, the 2-hour feature film, doesn't bear a relationship to, say, YouTube. So a couple years ago when I was teaching at our other campus in Qatar, I said to a student, well, you should watch this movie. And then so he came back a week later and he said, I watched it. And then as we're talking, it came to bear sort of light that he had watched it in increments on YouTube. And so, you know, I had this moment where all of a sudden I got grumpy and old-fashioned, and I wanted, like, you know, and then I realized that, you know, the era in which I grew up, right, of my film education, and I was very fortunate, was near really fabulous archives that did 35mm screenings, like, you know, every night of the week, and you could always go and see this stuff. And so I got grumpy, right, because, and then I had to realize, well, this is his sort of media access, and what would be the sort of traditionalist approach for me to kind of go, like, you should go watch that on DVD, because that would have a kind of intactness that, you know, that I'm getting. Because, yeah, I'm worried about stuff like, well, what did you really watch on YouTube? Like some kind of greatest moments from the movie. And the movie, by the way, was a movie about Hollywood. It was Sunset Boulevard. So, you know, I had to start to think about this idea, and I think this relates to things like the internet and mobile devices, that for many sort of viewers, one of the ways to go into the mediascape, to gain access to the feature, is through these new things such as, you know, streaming technologies or handheld devices. And, you know, what do we do with, and I know, Caetlin, you care very, very much about theories of spectatorship, right? What do we do with those theories, which talk about the feature film as a meaningful cultural unit, when someone is screening a 7-section or minute portion of a feature film on the subway?
Right. Well, so I'll say two things. One, I think we should remember when we talk about how film studies blossomed as an academic discipline in the 1970s, we credit that a lot to that first generation of academic film scholars, right? Not the only film scholars, but academic film scholars, watching the great classics as Saturday night movies on television, right? So they were watching these amazing movies like Sunset Boulevard broken up into 10-minute increments too. So I resist the urge to get all high and mighty, even though I have, you know, spewed steam when my students told me that they watched something on YouTube. I think we just need to be attentive to the act of translation, to quote Charles Tashiro, right? It's not the same document anymore. And that, I think, is where we get into trouble, when we pretend that it's still film, right? I mean, you talk about being a filmmaker in the 21st century, and I want to be really resistant to that in a way. I was like, well, you're absolutely accomplished videographer, but if you're not using film, why do we want to hold on to that word? What's at stake in that kind of nostalgic desire to claim a medium that we're not working with anymore? Especially when, you know, Vine, like the 6-second video, that was never a filmic phenomenon, right? So what are we saying? What's implicit when we call a Vine a film?
Well, I want to say I am a filmmaker in that I do have a layer of film like growing on my head right now, which might be a little shiny and glaring for all of you, so I apologize. Other than that, I'm not a huge fan of the term filmmaker. Yesterday we were talking about how it might be a misnomer at times, but it's so closely resembling, talking about video, resembling the traditions of filmmaking, celluloid film as we know it, that it's kind of a shortcut. And so it's one of those words that has that meaning attached to it because of the relatively recent history that's there. But I'm not terribly attached to video. I don't consider Vine filmmaking. I wouldn't normally say that unless it was a shortcut to describing it. So.
But isn't it story? I mean, it's story, right? A film, no matter what you shoot it on, let's get back to materials. If you shoot it on film, or you shoot it on digital, or you shoot it on whatever, if the story isn't there, the film, you having trouble with the word filmmaking because the word film is in there? It's filmmaking's like Scotch tape. When you say filmmaking, you're talking about the art of creating something that somebody watches. To me, that's filmmaking.
Okay.
Moving pictures. Yeah.
So to me, I'm really interested in how, I'm not going technological determinist here, right? This is not a McLuhan, the medium is the message. But I do think that filmmakers and videographers draw inspiration and work with the affordances and shortcomings of different media, right? And when we acknowledge the differences between different media, we can say, okay, like video and non-linear editing, that changed storytelling in a way that's really important, right? We wouldn't have the kind of rapid shots that we enjoy in a green glass picture right now if it weren't for non-linear editing. So yes, storytelling is, I think we can say, probably what is closest possible to an element of human nature. But when we call it a film, we ignore, or we force ourselves to overlook really interesting ways that the kinds of stories we tell and the way that we tell them has been forced to change.
Right, and I think every generation, there are people who take that change and do what you're saying, that Green Glass, is that his name, Green, the 93, Flight 93, and all that Bourne stuff. And guys who flip it the other way and do one take. Jim Jarmusch was shooting one scene that would just, one scene would go on, he'd fade to black, come up on the next scene. I think the tools are there to do whatever you want. I think probably if you look back, there were probably some fast cut editing stuff that was done on film years and years ago, right? It's the tools don't change the storytelling, they just make it easier. And in some cases, because it's easier, maybe it kind of flattens out what might have been a better. I mean, you look at a Michael Bay film, or you think of all these, and I'll come from a technical side, okay? Because I've been in rooms where people used to come in with dailies, film dailies, okay? And they would be very buttoned up, and the producer would be very buttoned up. They would know exactly what shot they want to use, because they have to take that piece of film that they're going to put in their video and go color correct it somewhere, transfer that piece of film on a piece of tape, and then put it in your show. And if they make a mistake, they have to do it all over again. And so budgetary reasons, it would just be astronomical not to walk in prepared. Now with the digital media, you can walk in and just load everything right in and just start going. And you lose a little bit of what the old filmmakers would complain about, which is sitting back and kind of just seeing what you have and make sure you get what you get. Steven Spielberg, I heard an interview with him when he was still cutting on film. No, he's probably off that now because he just had to be. But he made a comment that when he was editing on a Steenbeck, there would be 7 minutes between when a roll comes off and a new roll would come on that allowed him to sit there and just think and not be just inundated with images and images and images. And he liked the smell of film, so that was, but it just, it has changed. I mean, it is 24-hour cable, information everywhere that people are just filling drives and drives of digital, there's so much media out there that, but ultimately, if you don't have the story, it's just not going to work anyway. And we won't go sit in the theater and watch a bad movie.
Wow.
On purpose.
You mentioned Michael Bay.
Do you go and see it? I don't go and see it. I don't see that.
I will stand up for Pain and Gain. That was a
Pain
pretty
and
good.
Gain.
That was a pretty
That's
good
his art
film.
film. That's his art film. All right.
Yeah, I don't really care what you call it. I think that, great, we could have said, oh, films aren't black and white anymore. Oh, wow, films have music now. They're not like what we used to work with. And in every one of those eras, the structure and the style dramatically changed. In some ways, it's just part of an evolutionary process. If you want to talk about films that were not edited in a temporally bound fashion until the advent of digital editing that sped things up, look at Man with a Movie Camera, which is, 80 years old now, and how it had that vision that led to a very sort of creative, fun, time explorative style edit. It just took longer to make.
Sure, okay, but Man with a Movie Camera is deeply interested in its medium, right? It's experimenting with the still image. We see shots of Elizaveta Svetlana, I'm totally massacring her name, but Vertov's wife at the editing table, and it's about its filmness, right? It's about the process of cutting. It's about the movement into and out of motion that this new photographic technology enabled. So to me, we want to talk about what happens to what film made possible for Vertov, right? The Kino eye. And if we don't acknowledge that the video eye is different from the Kino eye, aren't we kind of cutting ourselves off at the knees? How can we enable the kind of revolutionary perspective on truth, vision, insert capital letter word here, if we're not attendant to media change in the way that someone like Vertov was?
Cool. I don't really care. I mean, I approach my films with the narrative that I need to tell, and every film I make is different. Every 2 years, there's a different set of tools that are available. I'll problem solve, see what I need to do to carry off the story that I want to convey, and that's about it personally.
But it starts with your writing. I mean, if you don't write, you're starting with that. However you get to the other end is going to change anyway. In 2 years, it'll be different. It'll be something else. But again, getting hung up on the word filmmaker, and I know I guess you're coming from. Again, I'm strictly in the technical, trying to deal with what's happening because it changes my business like that. Next week, a new editing system could come out, and I have to learn that one, and it's a whole. And there's a great. Have you seen the documentary Side by Side? That is a great primer on film to digital. The evolution of editing, random access editing. It starts on the Steenbeck and goes through the Avid and all the other needed all. And what I find interesting about that is how the actors treat the difference between film and digital. Because when you're shooting with a film camera, you have a 10-minute mag, so they're getting the take for them. There's some pressure to get the take. And they hear the whir of the camera, and there's some emotional thing that's involved in that whir of that camera. Whereas when you're shooting digital and you can shoot for 2 hours, it's a little bit different, right? And they talk about how that changes their performance and it maybe changes the direction. I just found that fascinating that they flipped it. And it wasn't just technical, it was the artistic side of what the difference between film and digital was.
But doesn't that indicate that we're in a new art form? I mean, if their style of performance has changed, one of the industrial side effects of this is if you can just shoot take after take and let these scenes roll, rehearsal time is being cut. So I was just reading this great interview about the production of The Big Chill, which think whatever you want of The Big Chill, there are definite problems. But Kasdan was talking about how he got his cast on location for, I think it was 2 months before they started shooting, to rehearse and to build the bonds that made that movie, you know, as melodramatic and soppy and awesome as it was. And so you're getting a different kind of performance when film requires rehearsal as opposed to video allows take after take. And I just want a vocabulary that lets us acknowledge that not that the art form is better or worse, but that it's changed.
Well, I think, we could go all night with this, but the technology's changing, but I don't think the filmmaking, the process of filmmaking doesn't change. You still need cameras, you still need the crew, you still need the director. The media is changing, the medium is changing. The cost of this stuff is changing, so more people can get into filmmaking that never could get in before because they can afford a camera, they can get iMovie or however they're editing when they're not in a professional environment. So I think filmmaking is going to be around forever. It's just how the medium's used, by whomever's at the time is using it. I think that's what's gone for,
So I'll jump on that last
Yeah.
insight in terms of the possibility of new kinds of participants in the manufacture of, and now I can't use the word film, moving image, something. In terms of our second question, which locates us around gender and minority representation, both in front of and behind the camera, and is there a transformation going on in the culture of the moving image in the present moment? I mean, one of the things that, and I think I will now reveal my own sort of sense of this, which is one would hope that many different kinds of participants see the opportunities that are on offer. But it seems, as I look out on a kind of dominant mediascape, I see a lot of straight white people and their kind of bourgeois concerns, right? I mean, it doesn't seem to me like I'm accessing new kinds of worlds and social worlds and aesthetic worlds. But that may be, and now I will sort of, put that in brackets and say largely around a certain object called the feature film. And new participants may be, in fact, innovating around the very things we're talking about. I mean, if there's a film festival that's going with a vertical screen, that might be an interesting kind of technological and formal constraint to think about new possibilities for other kinds of participants.
Yeah, well, when I saw this question, I was a little surprised, actually, because I don't think, it says, what are the changes in gender and minority, I think, representation in cinema as a whole, and I'm new to the scene, so I do not have the experience to talk about this in terms of the past, but I don't see a lot of representation, especially in terms of directors, writers even, beyond just what you mentioned, straight, white, male. La Vie d'Adèle, Blue is the warmest color, was a film recently that had two young women in love, and the director, I believe, was a man. And although, represented two things. One is, it's like if you have a film with a gay protagonist, everybody hears about it, and everyone has to, be super, hypersensitive and interpret it as, this is the one or two films that we know that are out right now like that. Which I think shows that there's just a lack of films. Maybe there's a lack of commercial value for films that don't sort of serve the gender and cultural norms that America or Hollywood has been accustomed to for a long time. There were criticisms of La Vie d'Adèle that the director was, I believe, a straight male, and that and as well as the actresses were themselves straight. And that the film was great, great story, fantastic music, great cinematography. The only thing it missed was lesbian actresses. So, I don't know. I think that there's still a big challenge right now in Hollywood. At the same time, I would say that when I look at a lot of my friends, and I grew up in Chad, Northern Africa. We have a drinking game every time I say Chad. And a lot of my friends, so this is directors who are on their first or second feature right now. The vast majority are women. This is people from Ghana, from Kenya, from parts of Southern Africa, from Northern Africa as well. maybe there's an argument to be made that in places where cinema is sort of emerging and there's not sort of a long-standing, you know, market for this is what people want, that anyone can come and share their story, and it's just as marketable or attractive as anyone else's.
Okay, I'm going to be a voice of doom right now. So first of all, I can't speak as well to minority work within the industry, but there's a couple fantastic researchers in California who every year put out statistics on the number of women working above the line and below the line in film and television. And the bad news is it's getting worse. The number of women directing, writing, editing is going down since the early aughts. So it doesn't seem to that new media is opening any doors within Hollywood beyond traditionally female roles in the industry: acting, costume design, line production. The other thing I want to say, and here I'm really going to be piggybacking off the work of one particular scholar, Alex Juhasz, who put together a fantastic online book project with MIT Press called Learning from YouTube. And Juhasz introduces a concept there that she calls niche tube, which is that within YouTube, you may find any number of minority voices. But if you look at the linking structure of YouTube and you look at the promotion practices within YouTube, you tend to find the same upper class white male stories that you see in the dominant media, that our tastes have not changed. And so therefore, these other voices are still fighting a very hard uphill battle to get links to their videos, right? She talks about the kind of video graveyard of YouTube, all of these fantastic original clips that you'll never see because searching through them, trying to find those tags, has become practically impossible at this point in YouTube's history.
The video game business has the same problem with the females below the line, because it's and this accident in Georgia, this horrible train accident that happened to that poor assistant camera person, brought up a whole level, not only that accident about how could that happen, but there are hardly any women behind the scenes in those, like grips, and there's a few cinematographers, but it's like a caste system in general anyway when you're below the director and everybody else. That's why she was on the train track. She didn't feel comfortable to say, I don't think I got to get out of this is not safe, I got to get off, because if she does that, the director's going to get upset, she won't get hired on the next one, she's done. So not only do you have that caste system, but she's also a female, and it's just, it just snowballs and snowballs, and you end up with all guys and all white guys, and I don't.
Yeah.
And if you're saying it's getting worse, why do they have a theory about why? Is it literally
Well, I
just
have a
they're just
theory.
well, it's
Because our tastes haven't changed, right?
Yeah.
This is a capitalist entertainment
so
society.
it's still based on what people want to go see.
If you want more films directed by women or people of color, you have to go out and see movies made by women and people of color, right? I went to see Obvious Child. I don't particularly like romantic comedies. I don't really like the kind of gross out stand-up, but I was like, screw it. It's an important movie made by a woman, and I'm going to vote with my dollars because that's the language that our commercial entertainment industry speaks. And we could also go the other way and try to improve grants for artists, try to refund the National Endowment for the Arts, and I'm down with that too. But historically, that doesn't seem to be the direction that we as a nation are moving in.
So correct me if I'm wrong, and I have not been to LA other than the capacity of eating cupcakes and drinking in the valley or whatever it's called. But apparently there are scripts sort of not even incubators, like script analyzing groups that work as consultants for thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that may run your screenplay against like an algorithm or like a mathematically aligned system that says like this works, this doesn't, without even testing audiences. Like if you have a bowling alley scene but the characters don't kiss afterwards, you're screwed. Like why would you do that? And I think that the fact that that exists reflects such sort of the commodification or the commercial nature of the bulk of filmmaking that we have today. And I think you're totally right.
Well, it's all money. It's investment. People are investing millions of dollars, and they want their investment back. And how are you going to do that? You have to, test it. A movie like Blazing Saddles couldn't be made today. That would never make it through that script analytic thing because they go, what, are you crazy? But, here we are. And Michael Bay film, let's go back to him, that last one he made still made $1 zillion. People still went to see it, and he even knows it. He goes, well, it's crap, but they're going to go anyway, and they're going to finance the next one. But how do you, A, stop people from seeing those, and B, get into the other movies you want to go see, like Obvious Child and some of these other films? I mean,
Yeah.
You could say, I mean, oh, sorry.
Well, worth mentioning is that this was the worst summer, although for the summer blockbuster in 20 years.
Oh, thank God.
And so there's a lot of hand-wringing going on in the biz about sort of what are we doing wrong, right? And it's like staring them in the face, right? Which is, well, you keep on making the same project over and over and over again because it was simply franchise sort of superhero movies
Right.
on offer, and then now we're getting into the third and fourth iteration of these things. So I mean, it's cultists who
Yeah.
are really engaged, and no sort of like innovation in the product. I mean, if we're talking about the U.S. industry, and there are lots of others we could put into the mix here, but that's certainly Hollywood has a really big footprint. That it's notoriously conservative. Right? It doesn't innovate until it has to, and then it innovates.
and copies.
And copies like
Copies
crazy.
the innovation, right.
But I think that this is a huge and important problem in terms of thinking about what kinds of social visions, because I think that that's what cinema does at some level. Is it has some relationship to the ontic or the real or the lived, and there, I love a big escapist thing. Godzilla is helpful in my life. But on the other hand, I think that there are ways that the realities of our troubled world, in this summer, I mean, maybe there's a relationship between the bad box office and what a difficult summer this was in a geopolitical way, means that I think audiences are hungry for something different. And Alex's work, I think, is sort of indicating that they go to look for it, and then this technology doesn't help them to find the pathways towards it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I think so therefore when we talk about film, we have to think about advertising, really, right? Like, I think you're right that we're not necessarily looking for Spider-Man Part 9 or what have you. But when you've reached your Friday night, you're exhausted, you're looking for something, and I'm like, well, Netflix emails me every week inviting me to come back. Facets and Mubi, they don't have those kind of advertising dollars, right, to inundate me with these requests. And so I'm like, oh, screw it. It's easier to go back to Netflix and settle for rewatching Tootsie instead of, it's easier. And I think we need to think about circulation and advertising as the route to kind of changing these larger economic trends.
Which, this draws attention to the fact that paradoxically, it used to be a lot harder to see cinema. Right? I mean, one of the things that I think Caetlin and I learned from the people who taught us, kind of generation ahead of us, who were those people in the 60s and 70s who invented film studies, was if you were in Iowa and you wanted to see Bergman, you drove 3 hours, to Chicago because it was playing for the weekend. And they started film clubs and had cinematheques, and it really was about building this culture. Now, ostensibly, there's convenience, right?
Right.
But then there's also just this huge convergence on the same product over and over again. The sort of unexpected sort of result of all of this access is, I think we're inundated with so much that we don't have people to help us to know what I call the kind of role of the curator, to say, if you don't know about this, you should.
Yeah.
Because Netflix doesn't do that.
Right, right.
Well, how many times have you seen the hype for a movie for months and months and months and go actually to the movie theater and it just cannot live up to what you were expecting? So you get it's like, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, right? Whatever that is. It's like, I don't want to keep doing that. And then the other thing we're not talking about is the piracy side, which is why more people aren't going to the movies, is they can see it. at home. And they're going after it now, but that's taking away a lot of movie-going experience. There's nothing better than a shared experience, and at a comedy or whatever it is, to be in a horror movie specifically, to go in and see it with a group of people. But you go now and you're disappointed so many times that it's why even go anymore. And the times that you're surprised, you go, oh my, I can't believe that one. And who sees a movie like Moon? I told you about Moon. Great movie. Who, I don't know anybody that's seen it. No.
Well, you're in the wrong room.
Right. Maybe. I don't know anyone that's seen it. But, and it's because they have these art theaters around, and that's, you can go see a couple of nice ones there, but, it's all watered down.
All right, so we're transitioning over to how we see movies now back in the cinema, because I'm still pissed off that there's no black female protagonists in American film, and there's no women directors and whatever. But I don't know what the hope is for that. I don't know if I watched a documentary just this week with Henry Louis Gates Jr. saying, you don't like it, go out and make your own film. But at the same time, there's still productive things to do and there's unproductive things to do. And if the directors that are sort of in the system, like you mentioned, the ones who are sort of already in, are making films that just play directly into what will be profitable, it's going to be a while, for sure.
So why don't we shift gears to our last question, and then we can open up for Q&A. We end up with how will the embodied experience of the cinema survive the era of fragmented media audiences and dispersed distribution channels? And I'm particularly interested in that language of embodiment in relationship to the things we're talking about. The resonance I hear there is a thing about what is the relationship of viewing to this kind of cultural production. And a moment ago I was saying sort of in the 60s and 70s to participate in a culture of the moving image. If you lived in Iowa, you drove to Chicago to see a Bergman film. Because you wanted to also be in an audience, and the relationship of audiences to the experience of the moving image wasn't just solely about the pleasure, the scopophilic pleasure of being in the dark, and that stuff from psychoanalysis, which is I think all well and true. It's deeply nurturing and fascinating, but it's also a remarkable thing. And I have to remind myself of this. You need to go and be in the audience to see what people are doing with this film. And I often find it very poignant and that some of the most important experiences I've had with relationship, and again I'm dwelling on the film as the screened feature, have been about and this happens in comedy most often, the shock of the discovery of the pleasure of a particularly well-made, brilliant piece of comedic filmmaking, and what happens to that group of people when they are sharing that. There's something remarkable about that. And so there's something that sometimes happens where you're watching a comedy by yourself, and it's kind of lonely to be, trying to enjoy this thing in isolation.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways I think about sort of this idea of embodiment as a kind of important experience for the moving image.
Well, I went and saw The Giver today at AMC Courthouse Theater, as I mentioned. The embodiment in terms of the really loud popcorn 2 rows ahead of me wasn't fantastic. But other than that, there's something to be said about an environment that, like you mentioned, has that sort of dark, like all lights blocked feel, fantastic sound that you cannot simulate anywhere else. So it's still sort of, to me, still seems to be an exclusive thing. I don't know anyone who doesn't go to the movies now, ever, because they can watch things at home. Also, there's this particular AMC theater, which a lot of the other AMCs haven't done this at all, but has its layout is larger chairs, they're more comfortable. Another franchise that would be interesting to look at is Alamo Drafthouse, which started in Austin and is sort of throughout the Midwest now. I had a screening in Kansas City at an Alamo Drafthouse, and there were maybe 30 seats in the audience, and they were in 3 rows, and here's our level right here. The next people are all the way down on the bottom, and I got caught right there. But the focus on sound quality and picture quality made even my film look good. So I think that there's the direction might be more of this sort of enhanced experience knowing that you can't get this at home. You definitely can't get it if you just downloaded a 600 megabyte DVD rip file, and also introductions of little perks like chef-run restaurants in the theater, alcohol on draft in the theater. It has created maybe a new theater experience.
They're trying, and I think the Alamo even throws people out who are texting, right? The one in Texas does. But I also heard another theater that's going to let you text. Okay, so they're trying to get people back in. The owners of the theaters want people to have that wonderful group experience. But when you get in there, I mean, if you got somebody texting or you got the loud popcorn, you kind of, it's all those things that get in the way of what you're trying to do, which is watch that movie and enjoy the sound and enjoy the whole shared experience with everybody. I don't know how you can get back to no phones in there, no other experience other than what's up there. I don't think we'll ever get there again.
Yeah, I don't think we can try to go in reverse. I was at the movies today too, seeing A Most Wanted Man, and I was asking my film companion earlier this afternoon how long until they stop playing the "Please turn off your cell phone" ads. So we had advocated against prognostication in this panel, but I'm calling it. I'm going to say 5 to 8 years. In 5 to 8 years, the studios and the chains will have figured out how to monetize second screen spectatorship, and then it will be not just allowed but encouraged. So I think, but I mean, we've lost other elements of other gimmicks, I would say, of film spectatorship in the past, right? We no longer have the raffles that they used to bring in audiences during the Great Depression. We no longer have the double features of the 40s and 50s. Spectatorship practices are going to change, and I really agree with what you were saying about how cinematic spectatorship is becoming a luxury, right? It's becoming a luxury item. And I think we can look at how some filmmakers are trying to embrace that. Currently, Hollywood seems to be trying to embrace the luxury of the big screen through elaborate sound mixes, which Harry could tell us much more about, or through CGI spectacle, right? So something like Guardians of the Galaxy, where a fireball just doesn't kind of look as great on your computer screen as it does on a 30-foot screen. But I also think we see filmmakers working towards video, and I would even say working towards piracy. The studios aren't entirely turning their backs on piracy anymore. They're not necessarily trying to quash it. So some movies and some movie makers will be innovating the cinematic experience just the way, theaters changed. They didn't die when film came along. They just changed. It became more of a luxury event. We're going to see filmmaking change for its different spectatorship. It already has.
Well, they're
changed for its different platforms.
and they're getting your money either way. You talk about Netflix, you're paying for Netflix. You talk about Hulu, you're paying for Hulu. Your cable, you're paying for your cable. They're getting their money from us no matter what. The question is, will they get more money if they can fix the theater issue? By fix, I mean make it like it used to be, where you just go in and watch the movie. I don't know if that'll never happen.
Say filmmakers aren't getting more money from streaming services.
No.
Even like music industry is a great comparative thing to look at. Spotify rounds down to 0 if you're like a certain cutoff point, and you have to have tons of listens and watches to even make a living off of a lot of these streaming services, especially for particularly independent films.
Yeah, we would also point out that the U.S. theaters and distributors have lowered their overhead to accommodate changes to cinematic spectatorship, right? Film as a distribution platform will be done in the next calendar year, right? We'll have 100% conversion sometime in 2015, and they are saving buckets and buckets and buckets of money, millions of dollars per title through digital distribution, right? So even if they say like, oh, we had a really bad summer, it's like, oh yeah, but you need to add in the $20 million that you didn't spend, right, that you would have spent 4 years ago to make 4,000 prints to open wide on Harry Potter Part 27, and they're no longer shelving that expense anymore.
Well, a bad summer in Hollywood is still a good summer.
Right.
And and I say this as sort of my aesthetic training was of a certain kind of reverential relation to the moving image, going to the cinema, right, and everyone being quiet. I mean, this is in places like Berkeley, California, right, in New York, where like this is a part of your aesthetic education, and I have to remind myself that I mean, we know from say the research of people like Tom Gunning. That there was a carnival going on in many cinemas. In the silent period, there was no silence, right?
Right.
There was a lot of social activity going on in front of the screen, and that it only became a certain kind of almost moral hygiene program within the industry later then to kind of try to make this a kind of reliable experience for some fantasized, kind of family audience, right?
Right.
And there were all of these kind of, sort of gynophobic, racist, ethnophobic, class-based biases about what Hollywood started fantasizing, and this is back in the 20s, was its audience, right? Because they were having all sorts of accusations made against them that these complicated viewing experiences were fostering, unsavory social relations.
Right.
And that part is awesome, right? And therefore, I'm like, well, maybe I should get over my aesthetic thing. I mean, the texting thing drives me crazy, but, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, bro, light bleed.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, with that in mind, why don't we open up the conversation to all the other folks in the room? Thoughts? Questions? Yeah. At the back.
Hi. So maybe I shouldn't ask a question because I'm one of the organizers of this thing, but I really want to ask a question because future of film is really close to my heart. And as a kind of technologist and someone who follows VFX really closely, there's a convergence going on in the stuff that makes money. You said Harry Potter 27. These things are becoming more like video games than they are films. They can be made in the computer. And we talk about the experience of going to a cinema, and you see that it's become more of a amusement park ride than it is about the content. You see something like Gravity making lots and lots and lots of money. That movie was made in a computer, essentially. They put the actors in a box that was made of LEDs, and they shined the rendered scenes in there. And they did it all. You're nodding your head, you know what I'm saying. So when we talk about this, when we look at the future of film, disregarding the use of the word film, let's even say the future of moving images, there is this convergence going on between the kind of experiential nature of a video game, and there's a saying that we've been even tossing around in our own internal settings of, we'll fix it in post, we'll fix it in post. If you look at how you make a film these days, a movie has flipped almost. You shoot your plates on set, and they have nothing in them. There's green, then there's a guy wearing a green suit or a mocap suit or whatever, and you essentially make the whole movie in the computer. You're animating it. Most of these things that make lots of actual money, let's forget the stuff that has good content and is real, we can consider more real cinema. We have to forget it because the economic argument is strong, right? Where the people are watching these things, and the whole system is set up to funnel in these things that are Harry Potter 27, Spider-Man 1,000,000, even Guardians of the Galaxy and all these things are the new comic books, right? They're this serialized content that's just being put out all the time. And we look at some of the advances that are on the near horizon with digital actors, and this isn't a joke anymore. Uncanny Valley is, we're pressing out of it. Paul Walker died in a fiery car accident, and they made a digital version of him for a few scenes. Hollywood has no issue with this. This is a business. And when you look at, like you said, you save a lot of money doing things digitally. And I think there's a lot of people in Hollywood looking right now of how can we do algorithmically generated scripts? Let's not pay people to go look at it later. How can we do completely digital actors? There's a great movie called Congress with Robin Wright in it that brings up this very idea. And that might seem sci-fi, but if you actually look at some of the stuff being done, like NVIDIA's FaceWorks demo, and some of the stuff at USC, this isn't that sci-fi. That kind of a rig exists, and they use it in film today. So the question is, I think, where really is the future of cinema going? Let's be speculative a little. I want everyone to just go ahead, let yourself go, because I don't see this format we've got going on, even texting in the theater, this participatory nature, they will monetize that. Because what do we want? We have so much content in our face all the time. We want to go to a place to watch that. We want to engage with it. How long before you're starting to vote on what happens next? How long before you're adding whatever character you want? I might want, you know, a series of cast in my movie and have it happen like that in an instant. So I'm rambling, but and like I want thoughts on that, because I think we said future of film, and I really think that there's a convergence going on.
We've got some space on the couch too.
This is going to be difficult. Can you please restate the question for the recording?
The question is invites the panelists to make some wild speculative guesses. So I'll offer one. You mentioned the uncanny valley and this question of CGI and the actor, and this is something that's we're crossing a threshold here, which is that the software and modeling techniques are now on the verge of basically being able to simulate virtually anything at the sort of highest level of resolution in terms of faciality, gesture, voice, what have you. I'll offer you an anecdote that made my hair stand on end. One of Marlon Brando's last films he made with the director Frank Oz. And Brando was basically just kind of showing up for a paycheck. But he resented especially the fact that he was working with Frank Oz, who he teased on the set as being the voice of Miss Piggy. That's sort of what he sort of objected to. And so Oz asked Brando to do a particular thing within a certain sort of moment in the film. And Brando said, I refuse on aesthetic grounds. I don't do that. And recently, Frank Oz went back into the film and altered the Brando performance to get the performance that he wanted. And he did this, and he announced this, to basically spit on Brando's grave and say, you don't diss Miss Piggy. So we're there, and the Robin Wright film, I think, is on top of this. So the question, I think, if I speculate, the institutions of stardom and celebrity are going to change hugely. They already are in relation to things like reality programming and things going on TV. And it will be remarkable to watch the manner in which performers see themselves as intellectual property. But the problem will be, I think, that there will always be a relationship of something like verisimilitude in the sort of CGI version of them to some reality of their presence and performance in, quote, the authentic or the real, right? A huge amount is at stake in that judgment, for example, around the category of Best Actress or Best Actor, which is deeply entrenched in the economics of Hollywood. It's an award they give every year that's really an advertisement. So I think that what will happen is really smart performers will start thinking about the legal and revenue channels for owning their own images.
So I'm going to do something which is really anathema to me, which is to be optimistic. So at the same time that we're talking about Harry Potter Part 27, and you mentioned Gravity, and I want to come back to Gravity, I would point to Her and Boyhood, right, as examples. Boyhood of slow filmmaking, and Her of a new way of thinking about actors without their visual presence, right? So at the same time that we're arriving at new norms of filmmaking, that also means that independent directors, scare quotes, are thinking through alternatives, right? What are the unexplored channels of this particular trend? And I don't think we would have seen a film like Her without this attention to digital actors, without this question of the actor, the disembodied actor. As for Gravity, I mean, what Gravity managed to do with three-dimensional stereoscopic emergence effects was, to me, was art, right? It took the historic, the bad seed, the bad child of cinematic exhibition and said, along with Cave of Forgotten Dreams and Pina, you can do something with this, and I can show you something about the state of vision and faith and verisimilitude that you didn't realize before. So that was a movie that gave me a lot of hope. I'm
Just
gonna
to
stop
clarify,
there.
the bad child being?
Oh, the bad child being 3D, and specifically 3D emergence effects, right? Things coming out at you. Ew, is there anything crasser? And yet, when the drop of water comes out of the screen at the end of the 13.5-minute long take that starts Gravity, you're invested in a three-dimensional space, a non-gravitational three-dimensional space, in a way that physiologically, kinesthetically, you may never have been before.
Cuarón's a fantastic example, I think, for this larger question, and I might be a poor speculator at the future, but it seems like Cuarón wasn't terribly ingrained in the industry's big level Hollywood, Avengers level budgets, that he's still actually on the cusp, that Gravity still sort of like is one of his films kind of coming up to that level. Since I guess Y Tu Mamá También, Children of Men. He did a Harry Potter. Oh God.
The best Harry Potter.
Root. So there's still sort of a come up there. And one thing that would be interesting to me is like how accessible will these new, simulating CGI computer-based technologies be for an aspiring filmmaker such as myself? Will I be able to afford this sort of help? I myself can't do any of these things. Will I be able to afford that quicker because it'll become more accessible and more widespread, or will it be more difficult? Will I even my second, third film be able to license the simulated voice of Scarlett Johansson instead of the real Scarlett Johansson? You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I mean, CGI is going to be here. It's it. But what I think, you bring up Gravity, and I'm glad you brought Gravity up. How was the story?
How was the story?
Yeah, I mean, how was the story?
Okay, honestly?
Honestly.
Freaking cheesy.
I watched that movie.
That would say to me that it's not always about the story.
Well, but again, that's because that was unbelievable what he did.
Okay.
But I watched that movie going, boy, Apollo 13, same story, get back from space, was way better. That's, as I'm watching that Gravity, and I understand what was going on, that was amazing what he did, but the story was cheesy. Exorcist, all practical effects. Not a single CGI in that movie. The floating bed, all that stuff. The guy who did Godzilla, the guy who finally got to direct Godzilla, I think his first movie, he created some CGI thing on his own computer. He got Godzilla because I think it was Cloverfield, he did Cloverfield, which he did all on his own computer, I think. So, I mean, yes, it's allowing people to do this stuff, and some of these guys are getting big jobs out of what they were doing on the CGI, but you'll never, I was talking to somebody today, there were directors out there shooting this room. They don't care about all the lights in here. They'll erase it later. You're never going to get that back. It's here to stay.
I think one very fascinating point of whether you call it video, filmmaking, whatever, is the idea of problem solving to create what you want to create. And ideally you want to push the boundaries. You want to give your audience something that they can't just go and sit on the street corner and see. And it's something that I think that a lot of people here in CCT have actually been challenging themselves to do, is explore, sort of push those boundaries, problem solve. When you don't have something to create the image you want, make it. Back in the day when I was a teenager making my first films in Chad, we had a scene where a character goes to Libya, and here we are 16, 17 years old. We had no way to get to Libya. I'd never been to Libya yet at that point. And we just shot, I had some footage from another country, from Turkey. Shout out to Handan, wherever she is. And then mixed it with a character walking and looking up to the sky and matching it to the building in Turkey. And for the purposes, for sort of tricking the Chadian audience into thinking this person went to Libya, and we amateur filmmakers editing on our VCR, which is VHS, as we were, had the budget to go to Libya, it worked seamlessly. And I think there's going to be similar challenges like that for every project, and hopefully ways that the little guys can get access and pull off some cool tricks.
They're already doing that. I mean, they're doing that. I mean,
What do you mean?
Just one more question.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
Hi, I'm curious about your thoughts regarding the disconnect between the representation of minority characters in film and TV, specifically women of color and LGBTQ characters as protagonists. Because you have shows like Scandal, or the whole Shonda Rhimes empire, and you have the whole Ryan Murphy empire on television, but that doesn't seem to translate to film because you don't see many women of color as protagonists in movies, whereas on TV they're hits, and it's not just scripted television, but it's reality television. So what is that disconnect, and what do you contribute it to, or attribute it to?
I want to answer that question. How many times are Hollywood protagonists going to find themselves in India? Because 1.4 billion people in India haven't found themselves in India. how many more movies are we going to watch like that? If you can just predict
them. Wasn't $1 Million Longest Shot in India? That one, but
Slumdog Millionaire,
Right.
Yeah.
Journey.
Origins, Georgetown grad.
Well, I have thoughts about that. So you raised the question of sort of, really it's about the relationship of something called cinema to, say, other forms like television, right? I think we discover how deeply racist the industry of Hollywood is vis-a-vis filmmaking and the feature film and the big film. And that its reliance upon accusations of it being racist are that it defers then to other sort of media outlets like television to say, but we have talent in our industry, right, that's, quote, diverse, right? And the truth of the matter is that the reason that stars are so-called stars is that they can command the kinds of salaries and the kinds of access to profits from large-scale films that no one in television ever could, or very, very seldom can. And I think it's some weird, like, deep cultural symbolic level that's about what people want a star to be. And they don't want stars to, with a few exceptions, like Will Smith, be people of color. I think that makes some kind of larger white imaginary uncomfortable. And I don't know sort of what the shift or change could be. The other thing that has to be taken into account is that, we want to talk about all the sort of ways in which, the culture industry is problematic. Here we're talking about cinema. Is that female performance talent, there's a famous limit. You hit the age of 30 as a woman in that industry, and you are done in a way that you can have a sustained career as a man in the industry. Look at Harrison Ford, right? That no woman can command that, with an exception, Meryl Streep. But that's the thing you always have to be paying attention to as you address these questions. These crucial exceptions that allow the industry not to have to cope with its larger sort of forms of racism and sexism, and much less homophobia, right? I mean, the fact that in 2014 we cannot abide by the image or the idea of a significant talent really behind the camera or in front of it being an LGBTQ person is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I think I want to, I agree with everything Matthew just said about a white imaginary that is deeply uncomfortable with looking at forms of difference in any number of directions. I want to challenge the idea that television is doing much better than film, though. I mean, when you think about, there are roughly 360 theatrically released films in the US every year, US made theatrically released films. I have 500 and something channels of cable going right now at my house, right? And what Shonda Rhimes has managed to do, my hat is off to her. I think she has truly changed television. But when we talk, I don't think she's truly changed television. I think she's done an amazing thing with television and created an amazing opportunity for others. But when we say today that we are in a television renaissance, the second golden age of television, and people point out these award-winning programs that are just as good as the movies, what are we talking about? We're talking about The Sopranos. We're talking about Breaking Bad. We're talking about shows about white boys, right? Which is precisely what Hollywood has been doing. And so I think that we really also need to change our change the way we talk about television. So it's really exciting for me to see television studies engaging with artistry and with auteurism on television. But I feel like there is a danger of repeating the mistakes of the past, of only venerating white male stories as the standard bearers. And I would challenge all of us, and so I really like your question, but I just want to point out that there is also, when we talk about the quality television right now, it worries me very much that people aren't talking about Shonda Rhimes, that when you read television criticism, she's not necessarily included in that canon, and Murphy isn't either, and that's a big problem.
God, I could talk all night about stereotyping in Hollywood, about the undercurrents of racism. I don't think people even acknowledge racism to be anything what it really is. I think that years from now we'll look back and realize how, yeah, we have a terrible legacy of slavery in the United States, which is where Hollywood is based, and you see those effects in every sector of life here. But there's racism all the time in Hollywood against anyone who's not white, right? I mean, like, I have not liked a film that contains Arabic lines that's not like in Arabic, right? It's not like, you know, written in Arabic. It is always effed up, always, without fail. American Hustle, Robert De Niro opens his mouth and he's like a fool. And like, why you didn't even care to research that or try better or to represent, to give this person, you know, the humanity that you gave every other character in the film, I don't know.
As an old white male, I feel pretty bad right now. So you know, and I don't like all the movies. So, but again, if they could sell it, they'll sell it. That's the other. I mean, Tyler Perry's making how many movies is that guy? Is he making money?
Oh yeah.
Right. So we're
he's making quite a
right.
few.
He's doing. And I'm not saying that is, but it's like if Hollywood could sell a movie, they'll sell a movie, but people have to go.
Well, so you raise a sort of, you know, the phenomenon of Tyler Perry.
Yeah.
Right. And there's something fascinating about that. And I read sort of lots of stuff online about people sort of saying, why can he not get the respect that he deserves? Which is that you may not like the product, but the way that he's assembled his own empire, right? I mean, he has his own studios there in Atlanta. He has profound control over the product in a way that's, you know, a fantasy for all people, filmmakers, cultural producers, and that the problem is that he's making a certain kind of sentimentalized kind of comedic light sort of that doesn't supposedly engage with the phenomenon of race in American culture in a way that many people would like for him to, right? But then we go, well, what do we expect, you know, the one person
Right.
to be doing, right? When really what we're sort of disallowing, right, is a larger sort of array of artists and intellectuals of color, you know, into the mix. So you can't put all this burden on just this one guy.
Tiger Woods goes through that too. Every time they ask the race question, they go to Tiger Woods. I mean, it's ridiculous, but yeah, I don't know. I just bring that up because I think if Hollywood could sell, you know, to whomever, they would, but people have to buy it. And that's coming completely layman's terms. I have no idea, you know.
One thing that's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
A common thread between a lot of these discussions is like Hollywood and then like a massive realm of independent cinema too. I think we can't ignore the fact that a lot of the studios have folded or downsized to a degree, and that a lot of major, you know, internationally distributed theatrical films are put together by individuals, knowing individuals, and the funding comes from a person or a smaller sort of studio rather than the tycoons of years past. There may be opposition to this idea, but I think it's one of the undercurrents right now. And I think that the independent world is a lot more representative of a lot of the things that we're talking about, I would hope. You know, we all let out a breath of exasperation when we heard Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry's one name. Like, name your second director, you know? Steve McQueen, I was going to say, but Steve McQueen's independent. Steve McQueen hasn't even made his best film yet. I think he's on the come up.
Is it really that independent, like Brad Pitt's production company funding 12 Years a Slave? I don't know if that's independent.
Yeah, but that's an executive producer jumping onto a private project, which is what I just said. So, I mean, it's similar. It's not like, it's not Brad Pitt Studios, it's Brad Pitt as an individual.
I hate to say anything optimistic in this room, because I know I'm going to get shot down later and I invite that. But do you see something like Orange as the New Black as something that starts showing women as individuals and races as not stereotypical? And gives people roles that they wouldn't have had before?
Yes, but I think it's important to think about the fact that we have to be spoon-fed those stories through a, let's say it, pretty boring, white female protagonist,
I get
right?
that.
An
I know,
upper
but
middle
the
class.
supporting characters, there's so many, and each one is shown like with not looking sexy and hot, and that's different for women. Like we haven't had
Yeah.
women who said, "I want to be shown on film as like I got like the
Yep.
age marks, and I got wrinkles, and you know, I got bad teeth."
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not something that women actors, female actresses often say. Can you just show me with some really bad teeth, please?
I don't know. I might agree, disagree here too. Orange is the New Black, I think, is a very fun, very fantastic show. I was amazed watching a show of mostly female cast. I thought it was awesome. It was an amazing moment. I even mentioned that to Sagorica, who's a huge fan. Okay, but last couple things. I think Orange is the New Black still works on racist stereotypes to develop its characters. You got the black girl who reads. Oh my God! You know, you have the white girl who can be a badass. You have the Chicana girl who can be loyal.
Characters, and each one is different. You don't
Where-
have
okay.
5 black chicks all the same.
My last question: how much funding did it get for season 3?
Okay, well, I don't want to go there. Season 3 of any show. Let's go. Lost season 3. Like I don't care where you go.
It's off TV
That's
right
on
now,
Netflix.
so, yeah.
Okay now.
Yeah.
I think on that note,
Love season 3.
so our discussion of the future of film ended up with Orange is the New Black.
I can live with that.
Yeah, okay, me too. Okay. Thank you all for coming. A big hand to the insights of our panelists. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks for inviting me.